What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another dope edition of Define Your Legacy. I'm your host, Theus Elijah McBee. All right, before we tap into today's episode, just want to shout out our online store, all right, which can be found in the link in the description of this episode. All right, we have t-shirts, long sleeves, hoodies, and a whole lot more. All right, so feel free to check out the link in the description of this episode. All right, and now, all right, we got Khiree on the show, man. What's going on, man?
What's up, bro?
Not much, man. I appreciate you for pulling up on the show. I already know some gems are going to be dropped. We're going to have a dope conversation. But if you could, man, just introduce yourself and tell the world what it is that you do.
For sure. So my name is Khiree Smith, born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut. My full-time job is corporate attorney. Right now I work at the top law firm for venture capital and tech startup deals. So mostly what I do on a day-to-day basis is handle those deals, whether on the company side or on the institutional investor side. I focus my practice primarily on top Black-led institutional investors and top Black-led startups. So a lot of like your favorite tech startups that are led by Black folks, or your favorite investment companies that are either investing in Black companies or are Black themselves. I represent them. I handle those transactions. But in general, man, I do a lot of things. I'm an artist, so I make music and I write consistently. I'm a creative in general. So, there's a whole list of things that I do.
Yeah. So let's start, if you don't mind, let's start from the beginning, right? You mentioned being from Hartford, CT. So could you talk a little bit about your upbringing?
Yeah. So Hartford is a small city in Connecticut. It's usually on the top 20 most dangerous cities list, on the FBI's list. It's a rough city, man, in terms of violence and drug use and general community struggles. Our city has struggled for a long time. And that's where I'm from. That's always been my reality. Very early on, I was lucky enough to get a mentor who got me into trying to be a part of changing the fabric of the environment, as opposed to just succumbing to being influenced by it. So very early on, I got into local politics and public speaking and learning how to be an advocate and training the young people in the community on how to affect change, and getting deeply involved with some of the rival gangs and forming relationships to help mediate some of the issues that they've always had and things like that. But Hartford is the beginning. That's where I was born and raised. I didn't leave home until college. And that's where it all started.
And did you seek out that mentorship, or did they kind of find you?
He actually found me. It's a guy named Andrew Woods, and he's probably the one person who's most responsible for anything that I've had in terms of success. And I say directly responsible because he's the guy who we met because when I was in middle school, I was at a conference that I had gotten sent to as a punishment. It was called the Respect Me Conference. It was like an anti-bullying conference because I was getting into a lot of fights. And while I was at the conference, I don't remember what triggered it, but anytime I had something to say and I felt like there was the right moment to say a thing, I would write like a little mini speech, and then I would raise my hand and I would just stand up and give the speech. So I was like, this little dude stood up and gave this random speech. And after that conference, he just approached me, and I guess he saw something in me. And I don't remember exactly what he said to me, but he told me about a program he was building to respond to some of the gun violence in Hartford. And after that, he just stayed in my life. Like, he introduced me to the program, and then very quickly made me one of the leaders of the program, and just like blessed me with a lot of responsibility that helped me grow up and really feel valuable. And then on top of that, he was just there. Like, he would come pick me up from my house damn near every day and either take me to the program, or if the program wasn't going on, take me to just like do something, go to the movies, or, fill the time. And he was like that with a lot of the young people in the community. So yeah, to answer your question, he found me for sure.
Yeah. So I got to ask, what made you so be willing to approve and be open to the mentorship, right? Like, because sometimes, as young adults, you might turn certain things down because you think, okay, I don't need this, or I can figure things out on my own. But what made you so open to doing that?
Yeah, it's that's an interesting question, because on one hand, I was open to the mentorship and stayed pretty consistent, but at the same time, I was difficult, man, and like I did not necessarily just listen to what I was being told, or um, I wasn't the easiest kid to get along with. I was a little smart ass, and I had difficult relationships with every adult in my life. But he just stuck with me. You know what I mean? I think he saw something in me, and I think he saw some of himself in me. So I can't even really attribute it to me being open. I can attribute it to him being persistent and him caring enough to, stick with a difficult case.
Mm, mm, mm. And that speaks volumes, I think, and definitely shout out to him in doing that. But I think I heard you mention something too about public speaking.
hmm Yeah, that's actually a good point. So one of the things that kept me engaged was that he gave me these opportunities to show my value. I think he noticed early on, obviously from that initial engagement, that I had a knack for communicating, and that I wasn't so afraid of public speaking. So very quickly, he was having me do keynote addresses for the program and introducing me to local political gatherings and putting me in position to speak at local assemblies. And then eventually that grew to me being able to build relationships with national and international organizations and traveling the world, not just public speaking, but training communities all over the world. At this point, I've been to 7 countries, met with local governments in Italy and Dubai, and trained the young people in those communities on how to strategically problem solve violence and drug issues in their communities. And that all flows from those opportunities that he gave me. And I think that speaks to one of the keys of keeping young people involved and engaged, and it's seeing them and treating them like humans and dealing with them on the basis of the best aspects of them and not the worst. You know what I mean? He saw the good things in me and he put those things to work, and it gave me a sense of pride. It gave me a sense of purpose. And those types of things are universal across human lines. So I don't care how difficult the young person is. And through that program, I've worked with a lot of extremely difficult young people, and they're difficult because they come from difficult circumstances. So they're trying to navigate that. And that's a truth across all of those lines, that when you focus on the good in someone and you speak to and give work to their purpose, they can't deny that. And usually the outcome is good if you stick with it long enough.
And how did you go from speaking at local assemblies to speaking in different countries?
Yeah, so it was a gradual process. So starts with the local program, and starting on the ground where you are and really committing to that work and working all over the community, getting to know and building relationships with all of the organizations locally. And then from that, I got invited to a national conference with an organization called CADCA, CADCA, it's Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. And this is a global organization that was formed by the government like 25, 30 years ago at this point. And they were starting a youth forum to basically galvanize young people all around the country. And the first forum that they started, we were there as participants, as attendees. And similarly to how Mr. Woods kind of quote unquote discovered me, I had an instance where there was a moment where I felt like there was something to say, or I felt like there was something I could contribute. And so I did. And then the leaders of that organization decided they wanted to build a relationship with me and have me come out as a trainer for some of the forums. And then eventually I cultivated that relationship and became the lead trainer of the forums. And then over the course of the years, rewrote the whole curriculum and trained thousands and thousands of young people attending the forums, and then trained the training team to keep it going, and just built a very strong relationship with that organization overall, to the point where years later, they actually called me back in 2017 to deliver the keynote address for the entire forum, which was over 3,000 people. But it happens gradually. In every instance or opportunity to speak what you feel is the truth, I feel like one thing that was always innate in me was seeing that opportunity and not being afraid to take that opportunity and then take it seriously. So every time I felt that impulse to stand up and say something, I made sure the thing that I was saying meant something, and I wasn't just talking to talk. And I think that creates its own kind of viral effect where someone sees that and then they go, you know what, I want to see what else this person has to say. And then you go to the next thing and then it happens again. And that's how I've had an entire public speaking career before I even went to law school. Before I was, before the age of 20, I had been all over the world and spoken to every type of person you can imagine. And it's all organic and it was all that way. I never promoted myself as a public speaker. I never reached out to any organizations. I never had representation or management or anything like that. It was all word of mouth, organic.
Yep. And I think in a situation like that, you kind of are an example of the best form of marketing. And I think the best form of marketing is having a good quote unquote product, or like being good at what you actually do. And I think when that happens, naturally the marketing will kind of take care of itself.
Yep.
And so even in addition to telling your story, right, through public speaking, what would you say to someone else who has a story but might be hesitant to become a public speaker?
Yeah, I would say don't focus on becoming a public speaker. Just focus on your truth, focus on extracting the value from your story. Like you said, everybody has a story and there's value in every story. There's lessons. Everybody's life is a parable, but a lot of us don't view ourselves that way. And we don't take lessons from our own experiences. So then we don't really see how other people could take lessons from our experiences, but that's just not true. And I think when we take the time to really extract the value from our experiences, then we develop our own sort of Bible. We develop our own sort of message that's going to resonate with everyone. Because at the end of the day, everybody's soul is basically the same. So the more you can understand your truth and your story, the more you can get to a point of having something that's valuable for other people. And then once you have that, and once you get comfortable with that, public speaking is just about having the courage to get up there. Because I've seen people who have a compelling story or who have a comfort with their story, but they don't have the traditional skills of a public speaker, enunciation, pronunciation, walking around and being captivating, et cetera, et cetera. But the story has so much gravity that it's more powerful than the performance. And I think at the end of the day, not focusing on the performance of it is the most important thing. Like you said, focusing on the quality and substance of the product, and then the rest will follow. They say form follows function. Yeah. I think that's true across any endeavor.
Yeah. And after doing it so many times, I'm sure you tend to improve and notice areas that, you can improve on your strengths overall. But in the beginning of that, were you ever nervous?
Oh, 100%. I'm still nervous. I was always, so I'm neurodivergent, ADD, and I suspect that I have like a speck of autism. And I've always been hyper socially anxious. As a kid, I was incredibly shy and socially anxious, but growing up in a Black family actually helps push you out of that, because most Black families, for better or for worse, view shyness and introverted tendencies as something to come out of or grow out of. And my family was one of those families. So over time, they pushed me out of it, shamed me out of it. And eventually I became more capable of, getting out of my comfort zone, being social in general, and doing the thing that for most people is considered the most social anxiety inducing activity, which is public speaking. But I'm still nervous anytime I speak. I had a hour-long keynote a few months ago, and it was on Zoom, and I was nervous, but I think for me, I've always had more of a desire to do a thing and to show up has always overpowered my anxiety. And I think that's the only advice I can give, is that every time you have to get to that place where you want to do the thing more than the thing scares you. And over time, you do get better and more comfortable. But I don't think there's ever been one speech that I wasn't nervous beforehand. You get a different kind of nerves, as you do it more. At this point, I've given hundreds of speeches for sure. And, I have my tactics to kind of help with nerves. Like one of the things I do is I call it talking to the butterflies. And it's like when you're about to do a thing that's nerve inducing and you feel that tingle in your stomach, taking a second to actually focus on the feeling and try to think through exactly what it is you're feeling and why you're feeling it. And whether you figure it out or not is not really the exercise. The exercise is to take the mystique away from it so that it doesn't scare you so much. And that works pretty well. Another thing, in terms of practical advice is when I used to train the forum and there were these rooms of 400 and 500 young people. And for the first probably 5 or 10 years that I did it, the young people were basically my age. And then after that, I was a little bit older than them because they all stayed, it was always high school age young people. One thing I would do is I would make sure that before it was my time to go up, I would make sure that they could, in their peripheral vision or just casually, see me doing something weird and goofy to humanize me. Because I realized that most of the nerves came from me putting pressure on myself to show up as some ideal. And I realized that if I broke that illusion before I got up there, that I would be up there free to really explore creativity and do things that inspired folks and touched them and made them feel like we were all there for something great. So those are 2 practical tips I can give. But the main thing is not letting it scare you so much that you don't do it.
Yeah. And one thing too about that is your audience was the same age as you, right? Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little bit about that. Not necessarily the fear part of it, but just the idea like you're trying to either inspire or motivate or talking to people that are on your same age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was an interesting time because, anytime you're put in a position where you are standing in front with a microphone and you're delivering something of value day in and day out to a group of people, there's sort of like this rock star effect that starts to happen especially when they are your same age. And there was a few years of that kind of a dynamic, and it was actually a very powerful personal growth period for me because I had to learn how to continue to give value and not let the praise inflate my ego beyond how inflated it already was. And my mentor, I had another mentor at the time, a woman named Khiree. She used to say all the time, the applause is not for you. The applause is not for you. And she used to just remind all of us, the applause is not for you. And what she was trying to say was, remember that even if they're chanting your name or if they're coming up to you asking for autographs and pictures after the event, what really it's all about is the message. It's really all about the value and the public service that you're trying to do, what you're trying to give. And, that actually ties directly back to legacy because none of us live forever and none of our identities live forever. I don't care how famous you become. I don't care, how big your brand becomes. Give it time and your name and your brand will be forgotten. But we can build things that the world benefits from forever beyond us, whether they forget that we were the ones that built it or not. And my personal belief about what legacy is that it's the thing that you can leave behind that will still exist even after your name fades away,
Yeah. And so do you think, and obviously, we talk about legacy, that being part of the overall title. When we talk about that word, do you think that's something that should be encouraged even more within our community in terms of, obviously, it's important to live in the moment, right? Take care of who you are now and your overall situation today. But do you think that it's something that we need to zoom out a little bit and think even more on a bigger scale?
Yeah. I think I think we could all benefit from some perspective and thinking about things along the micro and the macro scale. And legacy is one of those things that, so, all right, so with Black people particularly, I think one of our superpowers is living in the micro and living in the moment and focusing on where we are and getting the best out of those moments. And that's a powerful, powerful skill or a powerful natural state to be in. And it's what has allowed us to flourish despite all of the trauma that we've experienced. But everything is balanced. And I think the other side of the coin in terms of when this thing is said and done, being able to say you had a balanced existence is exactly what you're talking about, which is thinking about what you're going to leave behind and how you can contribute to however long our species exists, to, you know, how you can contribute to our mark. And I think there are a lot of ways we can do it. I think the main way, obviously, is having children and being in their lives. And I think a lot of people who work very hard to build business legacies or, you know, media empires or academic legacies, they do a lot of work and then in the end realize that the biggest, most important legacy is imparting as much wisdom and support and love into their child, because that's really the only form of immortality we get. But the general concept of legacy, I think, is something that is important for us to start thinking about, because it'll allow us to not just survive and flourish through the trauma that we've experienced, but start to move away from it and start to build significant value for ourselves and for the rest of the world. And I don't think you can do that until you have the ability to think beyond your 100 years. And one last thing on that point, I think it's difficult to expect that of us without us having had an opportunity to heal as a people and as individuals. I know one thing that was monumental for me was I actually retired from the practice of law. It's been over a year now since I've been back, but I was out for 2 years that I retired from practicing law, and I wasn't doing anything. I had plans of, you know, diving straight into entrepreneurship and everything, but I just realized I needed to do anything. And all I did was work on myself, map out my psyche, my mental health, and heal. And if not for that time, there's no way I could ever see myself doing anything long enough to leave a legacy. Prior to me having that time to heal, everything I had done felt temporary. And I always felt a tension, like, okay, when's going to be the day that I'm done with this? The idea of consistency was not necessarily a real thing for me. I was only able to do things that would last by doing them well enough in a short period of time that it would have an impact. But doing something consistently was not real until I healed. And once I healed, there was all of this tension that just released that now allows me to be at peace with the idea of doing a thing for the sake of the thing. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what you need to be able to do something consistently in order to be able to leave a legacy.
Yeah. What were you attempting to heal from, if you don't mind me asking?
Man, I think all of us, we go through this period of needing to heal from our childhood. And a lot of times it starts with this idea of self-acceptance. I think in general, across the board, because our parents love us so much, they try to perfect us from a very early age. But that process of trying to perfect us sends us the message that there's something wrong with us. Even if that's a misunderstanding, that may be one of the great disconnects between parents and children. But as a child, that's the message you get. And I think we all build up this sort of tension that we spend a lot of our lives doing things to find acceptance. And whether it be the jobs that we chase or the accolades that we go after or the type of women or men that we date, we do things searching for acceptance. And we just kind of have this general idea that we're doing things because we want to, or we may even be a little bit woke and know that we're doing it for some kind of acceptance, but we never really dig deep and, you know, trace it back to the roots. So that's one thing that I was healing from, this idea of true, deep self-acceptance, and everything related to that. You know what I mean? And the things that are related to that are, the need for social approval. If you develop a habit of being a people pleaser, a few things happen. One, you get exhausted by social interaction, and then you're not as happy. You're not happy alone, and you're not actually as good when it comes to other people. And then that snowballs into additional, additional social anxiety, because you're constantly thinking about how to make that interaction the right one for the other person. And that's just one example. So there's this ball of, mental health related, anxiety related, depression related things that I had to work through and understand and heal from. So what I did was I developed what I call my mental health map, and I broke it down from symptoms and triggers. And I just kind of reverse engineered based on behaviors that I identified in myself that I didn't necessarily like. And I went, okay, if I don't like this behavior, then we're going to call it a symptom, because we know it must be a symptom of something. So then I would go, okay, if this is a symptom, then something must have triggered that symptom. So then I would reverse engineer to what the trigger was. And then now something must have triggered that trigger. So I would look at that first trigger like it was a symptom and figure out what triggered. And it became like dominoes, where I was able to kind of look all the way back to childhood and what main core thing led to, a lot of the things that I wanted to heal from. And it, is one of the most important things I've ever done, for sure.
And would you say, as a Black man, is it a challenge dealing with overall mental health?
For sure. So I think the main thing that is challenging for Black men as opposed to other cultures is the sky high expectation of being invincible, and this idea that if you show emotion, if you are sensitive in any way, then that is a form of weakness. And that makes it difficult, especially when you're young, to really engage with your feelings and get an understanding of them, so that you can be that rock that everybody's expecting you to be. I feel like for Black men, there's often this expectation that we behave like a rock, that we show up as a rock, but then this condemnation for us being a rock. So as children, we get taught to become a rock, and then as men, we get cursed for being a rock. And there's endless reasons why our culture is still at that stage where it's producing that effect. But I think that's one of the main things that's difficult. And I think for Black men, the real answer right now, if you want to break out of that in your lifetime, is to really just find a place where you can lovingly not give a fuck. It's like you take responsibility for how you're going to show up in the world, and recognize that at the end of the day, regardless of what people expect from you or how people treat you, you have to deal with you. So working through that stuff is in your best interest. And then as a result of that, it will be in everyone around you's best interest, because you'll be more equipped to take responsibility. If you're a Black man that sees yourself becoming the head of a household, you'll be more equipped to carry the load happily and gladly, and be that healthy rock for your wife and your children, and be able to teach them everything they need to know without resentment, and the resentment that flows from exhaustion, really. So
Yeah. And do you think kind of like mental health and financial wellness kind of go hand in hand? Do you think they're kind of related in some way?
100%. And it was actually a major epiphany for me when I realized that. And when I have conversations with people now, and they go, "Oh, Black people can't save no money because they spending this and they spending that," I always try to remind them that spending and shopping is a dopamine chasing behavior, and there are all types of dopamine chasing behaviors, and I identified a lot of them in my mental health map. But things that give us a quick, instant shot of dopamine. Dopamine is the reward chemical in your brain. things like shopping, sex, social media, these things give us a feeling of having accomplished something. But the problem with those behaviors is that they don't require us to actually accomplish something. So what happens is we get this maladaptive dynamic between us and the behavior where we're like overdosing our brains with rewards without having to work for it. And then that makes us work less. But that's a separate issue. On financial literacy, yeah, the reason why we engage in these dopamine chasing behaviors is because oftentimes there's a deficit of dopamine because of some other mental health issue. And oftentimes, if you're depressed or if you suffer from chronic anxiety, either it's because you've not gotten enough dopamine in your everyday life or growing up, meaning maybe you didn't get in a position where you were made to do hard work in order to receive a great reward, or in your current life, you don't have many opportunities to do that and to, really show up for yourself and impress yourself. And then so what happens is you're thirsting for that dopamine. So you're going to find the ways to get it that are as easy as possible. And impulsive spending is one of those easy ways, especially with like Amazon or, Postmates or whatever the case may be. And it's a double whammy because not only do you get the dopamine hit from buying yourself something new, you get the dopamine hit from the social acceptance that comes from having the new thing. So it's a terribly like difficult addiction to break free from, especially if you're only focusing on the behavior. Again, that's only a symptom. That's a surface level symptom. And like you alluded to, if we recognize that really what we should be focusing on is the trigger, the mental health, then those desires just go away. That's one of the first things I recognized when I worked on my map and then I started meditating on the core issues is when I'm in my best place, health-wise, those desires, those impulses, they just don't exist. I just don't feel the same way anymore. It's just like, I don't need that. I don't want it. And then when I catch myself doing those things, like, and sometimes I do still catch myself go out and buying this and buying that. Now I have a symptom that I can now keep my eye on and go, oh shit, I've been doing a lot of shopping and we're in a pandemic. I don't got no reason to really be shopping. Something must be going on. There must be something that's triggering me or, some anxiety that I haven't dealt with or whatever the case may be. And then it gives you the ability to go back and check your life real quick. Maybe go back through the text message. Like, is there some girl that fucking left me on red or some shit like this? Is there something bothering me that I'm not dealing with that's coming out in, these impulses? Well, 100%, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the mental health, you can't invest in a smart way. You can't budget in a smart way, and you can't save in a smart way if you can't heal those impulses. Because you can have an intellectual understanding of, like, I think most Black people understand, and most poor people understand, like, things they can do to have more money, except in circumstances where they have very difficult circumstances and just don't make a big enough wage. But I think more often than not, there's an intellectual understanding of what to do, but there are so many hindrances and impulses that stem from mental health issues that it just becomes this insurmountable task. Because at the end of the day, people need dopamine. We can't live without it. And if you're not healing like the improper relationship with it, or you're not getting it from elsewhere, you're just going to be miserable if you're not getting it. And then if you're miserable, you can't make money anyway, because you can't even work or you can't even get up out of your bed, etc. So it's a much more complex and difficult cycle than people like to give credit to.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned just the idea of like breaking free from bad spending habits. Like there's probably a layer underneath that's even bigger than just what you're spending your money on. But my question to that is, like, let's say, like basically defining what it means to be able to afford something, right? So in your example, you might have used Amazon, right? If someone buys, let's say, I don't know, spends $200, right, on something on Amazon, and someone might say like, you shouldn't be buying that, or / like chill, relax. But in some people's minds, like, all right, I have $200, you know what I'm saying? I can still pay my rent, but knowing that like, okay, even though you obviously have enough to survive, you can't afford it. So do you feel like there's a difference between buying something just because you have the money versus truly and actually being able to afford it?
Yeah, 100%. So, a lot of people talk about the rule of thumb: if you can't buy it twice, you can't afford it. And that's cool. That sounds nice. And sure, if you can't buy it twice, at very least, you should not be trying to buy that thing. Probably if you can't buy it 3 times, you probably shouldn't be trying to buy that thing. But the way I think about it, and I have unique circumstances, because one of the symptoms of my ADD is actually impulsive decisions and impulsive spending. So I had to learn to hack myself a long time ago. And I use 2 things to do that. One is the idea of opportunity costs, which is like a basic economics principle where you think about not only what you're spending the money on, but what you could have spent the money on and didn't because you put it over here. So developing an understanding of money as value and not just as an object, and understanding that if you buy this, it means you can't put that same money over here. Now ask yourself, which is the best place for the money? Now maybe place B is going to allow the money to grow, whereas place A, the money is gone forever. So I've developed a habit of really only buying things that I can justify as an investment. And oftentimes there are things that don't look like investments that are investments. Like I have a very expensive camera. I have, a very expensive piano over there. I have like limited edition Louis bags and stuff. Like I got, this diamond Rollie, and all of these things though appreciate in value or hold their value, or they're tools that will create value for me. So like my camera creates content for me. My piano helps me make music. This watch has grown in value more than my stock portfolio since I bought it. And it was much easier for me to develop that habit than to try to break my habit of spending. So now I negotiate with myself. When I see a thing that I really, really want, I have a conversation with myself. I go, is there any way I can make this a purchase that will create value? And if I can't rationalize it that way, then I just don't buy it. And after a couple years of behaving that way, now I can't even bring myself to buy something that I can't rationalize as an investment. And I think that tactic will be a good one for a lot of Black folk, because those impulses are so deeply ingrained. So it's like, all right, don't go, all right, don't buy nothing. Don't get no fly shit. Don't don't get nothing. Like I got a few limited edition Kobe's in the closet. Like, the message for me is don't not buy dope shit. Buy really dope shit. Like buy shit that's
mood.
Like buy the stuff that one way or another is going to continue giving value and maybe even give you more value, down the line. Like I also have a Turo business. We got 5 luxury cars in our business. We got 2 Mercedes, M4, and 2 Mustangs. And all of those cars make money for us every single month, but we also get to drive them. Like, you know what I mean? There are ways I think once you start thinking of money along the lines of the concept of value, then it's like being Neo and you finally see the Matrix. You start realizing like, oh, I don't ever have to actually spend money. I don't ever have to put money in a place where it really just kind of disappears. Like, you know what I mean? Except food. And that's still kind of an investment because I need it to live. And if I eat well, I do well. I don't have to buy. The only time I really lose money is when I buy bullshit. And I don't have to buy bullshit because I can, buy the other stuff that keeps my money. I think that's probably the missing link.
Yeah. A lot of financial literacy is just based off decision making and choice, right? If you give 2 people, let's say $5,000, right, and then these 2 people do 2 different things with it, now that has, obviously to deal with exposure as well, but at the same time, just your simple choice. But 2 things, right, that you just said, because I wanted you to, I want to hear the whole story with that too. But 2 things: 1, the Rolex, and 2, the Turo business. To start off with the Rollie, my question is, this idea of lifestyle marketing, right, is a real thing, right? But this, at the same time, there's people who buy things just for the purpose of looking cool or flashy or whatever. And I'm asking you this because, again, to your point, it's okay to buy dope shit, especially if it goes up in value. So you get so many people that say, you shouldn't buy this, you shouldn't buy that. Well, if you have the mindset of knowing ahead of time what this can do for me long term, then it's good to do that. And that's why sometimes it's best for some people to, mind their own business. But anyway, my point in bringing this up to you is, did you know ahead of time that the Rolly would appreciate, or like, was that your overall intent, or did you just buy it just to have it, and then it just so happened that oh, we up now?
100%. I knew ahead of time. So again, it's kind of my thing to, when I feel that impulse to buy something, to figure out a way that I can buy the dope thing and make it an investment. But with the Rolly, the watch market right now is kind of insane, and it's been insane for, I don't know, it's been over a year now, where a lot of really high quality watches are just going up in value. And it's kind of more quickly than it has ever happened for the watch industry. But anytime I make a purchase that is any more than a few $1,000s, I get obsessive about research. So like my camera, for example, it's a Fujifilm X-T4. It was a few $1,000s, but I researched every single type of mirrorless camera in the range for probably for the camera, it was probably like 2 months. When my last car was a flashy car, researched that for a year before I got it. And then when I got rid of that one and got my next car, same thing. For the watch, I learned almost everything. I mean, watches, there's a lot to know about watches, but I learned almost everything I could about the watch market, about each watch style, about the brands that matter, about the ones that are bullshit and why they are bullshit, about what makes watches valuable as an item. Because I don't just want to know that there's speculative value. I don't just want to know that there's a market out there where it's going up in value. I want to understand why. And that why also has to make sense to me for me to make the investment. So for example, for watches, as a machine, they're amazing machines. Automatic watches, they keep time without electricity. It's just literally the mechanic of the watch. So on one hand, there's this idea of utility. It tells time, cool. Our phones do that or whatever. But also the idea of it having utility and being a piece of jewelry. So now you've added two things that alone might not be that valuable, but you combine them and it's like, oh, now we're starting to check boxes. And then you add an illustrious history / brand that has been consistent. And you realize like, okay, now I know that there's a population of people across multiple generations who have steadily and consistently believed and invested in this thing. And then you look at the kind of people in the market. Now I know that very wealthy people who are very careful about their money and who will lose money if the market doesn't do well are invested in this thing. So there's some safety in that also. And you start to just put it all together for yourself and you go, okay, I think that's a purchase that makes sense. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I mean, you never know that a thing is going to go up, right, but you do all of your research and you make a decision based on as many data points as you can reasonably digest.
How are you able to kind of research the potential ROI? Because, as a stock market investor and someone who's heavy in real estate, I feel like, okay, and maybe it's the same thing. I would just say Google search, but was there anyone that kind of put you on game, or was it like, did you already have previous knowledge of it?
I always start with YouTube. YouTube is probably the best way to get information from actual people, as long as you're making sure that the content that you're watching is from actually knowledgeable people. It's no different than if you meet a person and you find out what they're about, you find out what their credentials are, and then you listen to what they have to say. So I always start there to get myself a foundation and get my bearings. And then I start talking to actual real people. So first I started with YouTube, and for months and months and months, just follow certain channels. Then I started going to the jewelry district and started meeting the shop owners, because then the understanding of how to buy something and then the actual buying process and making sure you don't get fucked over, those are two completely different games. So then I had to kind of like dry run for a while to make sure that wasn't going to happen, and meet the people and go through the process. Then I had to learn a lot about authentication of watches. So I had to study a lot of things so that when I was purchasing mine, I would be able to be confident that I wasn't getting some fake shit. And yeah, so it's all of those things. And for every market, there are different ways to get those data points. But I think the key is just understanding what your goal is and being as creative as possible about getting the data points that you need if they're not readily available. And of course, like starting with Google, people try to not Google, but it's like, bro, the gold mine is there. Like, you know what I mean? Google, YouTube, and then branch out from there,
Yeah, and the internet is free. You know,
Mm-hmm.
sure the watch wasn't, but the internet for people listening out there, it is free. Everyone can access it. If you have Wi-Fi and a laptop, get active. But what do you remember? What it was that you YouTubed, or what like specifically like things that you typed into Google?
Yeah, like I start with like simple, like when you don't know when you're not in the space, because on social media there are all of these like silos and whatnot. So I always start with like really mundane stuff like Rolex videos, or like how to tell if a watch is fake. And then you slowly start to find the channels that everyone's following, and then you start to see the channels referring to each other, and you're reading the comments and you're seeing how people engage and whatnot, and you see the channels with the biggest followings. Like there was one I started watching, Timepiece Gentleman, and then there's one called Gray Market, and and then you go to their YouTube page and you find their IG, and then you go follow them on IG. You start to see what they post, and then you find out who's local that has a foot in the space, and you follow them. And then it's that kind of thing. It's really like, it's when you naturally engulf yourself in something and you just like kind of make it your world. For me, it comes natural because, again, I have ADD, and one of the symptoms of it is hyper focusing on a thing. So once something catches my eye, I just hyper focus on it. But yeah, it comes down to all those different avenues.
Yeah. And so Rollies, are a different asset class, right? And so obviously people always talk about, real estate, stocks, even crypto, life insurance, the common ones, the popular ones that you hear about. But kind of what does it mean to you to know that you've entered into a different asset type of class with Rollies?
Yeah. And, people argue about whether or not it can qualify as an asset class. I think the term for it,
money off it.
Right. Are not investments, but they either, especially Rollies, they either keep their value or they go up. But I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it feels good. It's an ego boost. The ego boost for me is, one, having the thing that I want and the thing that the community acknowledges is desirable, but getting it for the right price and not being foolish about the purchase. I always feel like shit when I just like give into my impulse, or I give into the social pressures on a purchase, and I either pay too much or I buy it in a time when I really shouldn't have bought it. Like that always makes me feel like shit. But I always feel proud when I have an item that I really love, that other people like acknowledge the beauty of it, and I know I did well when I bought it. You know what I mean? That always makes me feel good. So I made sure I checked those boxes on this one. And that's, I mean, this watch topic is good to harp on too, because even though the Black community, we're starting to get an understanding of like the value of things like watches, and an understanding of how to do what I'm talking about, which is get the things that you want while still making an investment. When it comes to watches in particular, we're still a little bit off in terms of understanding how to execute on the investment and like which one to get. So like, for example, we like to narrow our market for some reason by taking a classic desirable watch and putting aftermarket diamonds in it. Or we'll buy a bust down watch that a jeweler put aftermarket diamonds in already. And we're just doing the math. We go, oh, Rolly plus diamonds equals value. But we don't realize that the market is made up of enthusiasts who have an appreciation for the thing coming from Rolex. So again, if you start thinking about value instead of just money, you get an understanding of, even though it's counterintuitive, the Rolex brand is more valuable than diamonds. So unless the diamonds that you have in your watch are Rolex diamonds, like what Jay-Z said, them ain't Rolex diamonds. What the fuck you done to that? So unless the diamonds are Rolex diamonds, you're devaluing the watch by putting them in there. Now, if you get like a little cheap old Rolly that's already not that valuable, and then you get diamonds, like maybe, okay, maybe you figured it out and you thought it through. But for the most part, a lot of people are taking valuable timepieces and then putting shitty diamonds in them, or even good diamonds, but diamonds that are not as valuable as the Rolex brand. And they're therefore narrowing their resale market and therefore lowering the value of the watch. And it's like, if you one of those people, like if you're a rapper or whatnot, and you can afford to like wear, if $100,000 ain't nothing to you, and you just like, cool, I got both. I got the investment piece, and then I got the club piece. Then all right, cool. We're not talking to you. But the idea of understanding that decision is what I'm talking about. And I think that's an important thing for us to start paying attention to, for sure. Yeah. Same thing with whatnot. And like, I just got into purchasing gemstones, and I bought this ruby not long ago, and I had to learn about the origins of rubies and why they're the most valuable gemstones, and which ruby mines have the most valuable rubies and whatnot. And it's all about the education and the knowledge that arms you to be able to make good decisions and continue to make money.
Let me ask something. Why don't you limit yourself in terms of, I mean, we've talked about a variety of things, right? Between Turo, being a corporate attorney, Rollies, public speaking. Yeah. Why don't you ever put a limit on yourself?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think everything, so when you have something like ADD, like everything ties back to it. And I think I didn't know it for a long time, but I think I'm grateful for my ADD for that purpose, because it makes me interested in everything. Anything that's interesting, I can attach to it, and I can hyper focus on it. And in terms of limits, that dynamic makes limiting myself feel like dying. Like whenever I'm doing one thing and not another thing that I love, or whenever I'm forcing myself to only focus on a certain thing and nothing else, for me, it's a really difficult experience. I feel like I'm like deteriorating over time, and it starts to undermine the value I can give to that one thing that I'm focusing on. It's counterintuitive, because for most people, if they only focus on one thing, they'll do their best work. And that's the best advice for most people, that you should focus on one thing, find the thing that you love, and just give it your all. For me, it's different. If I do that, it doesn't work. I have to prioritize one thing big time, but there also have to be other things that are stimulating me. Otherwise, my brain just feels like it's just crumbling.
So there's all this kind of in a hunt for more money and more income streams, or to ease your, I guess, overall stress level?
It used to be. So that's a great question, man. I went through so many evolutionary cycles over the course of my life. And I think the main arc was going from, Hartford all through college, all through law school, and getting a job at top law firms. And I did all of that without really knowing why I was doing it. And the whole time knowing that, being at a law firm or, anything I was doing wasn't really a forever thing, but I had never really examined it. And for that entire arc, it all did stem from, my battery. For that entire arc, it all did stem from a form of social anxiety and looking for acceptance and doing things that I felt like would deem me valuable and important, etc. But as you grow, that doesn't hold up. There comes this reckoning, especially for men, because we're so used to powering through. There comes this reckoning where you have to deal with the truth of what motivates you, and you have to reckon with your own ego and get to know the difference between your true identity and your ego, so you could develop a healthy relationship with your ego. And I went through that whole process, man. I went through this idea of ego death, and my time in San Francisco was really, really magical. And I had to, after healing from a lot of the stress that was motivating me, and breaking free from, and then, re-engaging with my own ego, I had to figure out why there was purpose in doing anything at all. And so, I retired for a while and I did nothing. And I did nothing long enough to realize that doing nothing was worse than doing something. And then eventually I got to the point where I am now, where I do all of this stuff because I choose to. And I think that's, for me right now, the healthiest place for me to be, and it may change someday. I think probably when I'll have kids, I'm doing all this stuff so that they can have the best life that they can have. But right now,
go ahead.
But right now, the healthiest place for me to be is doing all of the things that I like to do, and some of the things that I like to do just out of habit because I've always done it, but now for a new reason. And that's because I choose to, because I can.
Yeah. I think, the ability and the opportunity, I'll even say, to have a choice in all this, right? Like, some people work because obviously they have to. Some people work because, they're their sole provider, the breadwinner, whatever, in their family. But putting yourself in a position where, you're able to do a variety of things can actually be a good thing too. Do you remember the overall process, if you will, of when you first bought a Rollie? Do you remember like the ups and downs of it?
Yeah. So the bulk of the process was educational. There was a moment where I realized, like, oh shit, I could buy a Rollie, and that's probably something that I want. Because all my life before that, I was wearing Movados, which are nice watches, and I was wearing them because my father had one growing up, and in the Black community, we have an appreciation for Movados. But there was just a moment, I forget, I might have been watching something and it came up on like a TV show or something like that, and it just kind of dawned on me like, should I? And then from then, once I get that feeling, that's like that spark that leads to the fixation and the impulse. So once I feel the impulse, then I have to go into education mode. So then I just started learning, and I started studying the different brands, and then the mechanics, and then the investment side of things, and then the community, the watch community. And I became a watch guy for just like a few months straight. Then after that, I started the experience of learning how to buy a watch. So I started going down to the jewelry district, which I live not far from, like every day for like weeks, and just like looking at watches and having conversation with the store owners and telling them that I'm on the market, and getting a sense of what that process was like. And then eventually I was having a conversation with the guy who I made a connection with, I trusted, and I found the one that I liked, and it felt right. Because you can also get into a cycle of just too much overthinking and too much data analysis. So I've tried to become better at knowing when it's time to pull the trigger, and then I did. And that was, I don't even know how long ago that was, maybe like a year or something like that.
Did you ever think that you would be a quote unquote watch guy?
Man, that's a good question. No, I didn't. I didn't. And there's a lot of things that I've become, hyper fixated on, and I never thought that I would be. I always thought that I was just gonna be a music guy, like, because that's the thing that's always been my thing since I was in since I was in middle school. So I built a studio at my house when I was in middle and high school, and that was before it was like so easy to really just go online and learn shit. There was no YouTube or nothing like that. So I did that. I took a similar approach with that. I used Google, and I started learning about equipment and learning about, it started with me wondering how I could get a real mic and how that would work with my computer. And then I had to learn what an interface was. And then I learned like where to buy shit from. But yeah, I always thought I was going to be a music guy, and that's pretty much it. But then, as time goes on and you grow older, you realize you can gain new interests. And, you look at other interest communities like and these dudes corny or whatever the case may be. But then again, another thing is as your ego gets smaller, you start to give more credit to things that other people like, and you start to be open to the beauty of different things. So it's one of those things where it's just like, oh shit, I might be a watch guy now. And now I'm a camera guy, microphone guy, and all types of guys. Yeah, man.
And you never know, right? Until you kind of start, right? You
Yeah.
just kind of you kind of just go with the flow kind of thing. But do you see a lot of people that look like you in that industry at all?
Not a lot, but it's growing. You know, I know that there are a couple of Black watch dealers that I know about, and that's not an easy space to get into. Very lucrative, but obviously there's a high barrier to entry because you got to be able to afford the inventory. Unless you just kind of work your way up slowly from one watch to trading for 2 to 3, whatever the case may be. So I know a couple of Black dealers, but not a lot of us.
Yeah. And so is your intent like at some point to sell? Like, or are you just like kind of keeping it? This is a buy and hold forever kind of thing. I'm trying to relate it to investing from I guess a stock perspective as well.
For this watch, I think probably what will happen is this one will get, I don't know, they say never sell your first one. So this is my first like real like high luxury watch. So maybe I'll never sell this one, but I'm not necessarily too sentimental about it. So it's possible that I'll upgrade it and then, you know, branch out into buying more. Yeah. I think I might end up with a collection, but I'm not necessarily a collection kind of guy. Again, like we just said, I might become a collection guy.
I was about to say, you never know, knowing you. You was never a watch guy, and now, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So I may end up with a collection, or I may just kind of, you know, trade up and then end up with one that I really love, and that just be my watch, you know.
And so how'd you get started with Turo as well?
Yeah, so I'm always looking for things that fit within the universe of things I'm already doing. And that was one of those things where it checked a lot of boxes. The way my brain works is like I see the world as just like kind of like this swarm of variables. It's like an ADD/autism thing, low key. But I see just like tons of variables just kind of swarming around when it comes to life in general and particularly specific topics. And then when I like focus on it or start to consider whether or not to engage in that thing, I can see it start to take shape. But those variables have specific values that I recognize. And if they don't start to align in some way, it doesn't work. So for Turo, it checks a lot of boxes. One, it's semi-passive. It's not very passive. It's not really passive when you want to do as well as we're doing. But it's passive as compared to other, you know, income streams. There's a low barrier to entry. You know, you can start Turo with no down payment, depending on your credit, on, you know, depending on the car you want to start with. There's a low barrier to entry. So we were able to, you know, scale to 5 cars almost immediately. It's immediate cash flow. The platform does a lot of the work for you. So they're, you know, pushing business to you. And a lot of the legwork of starting a startup is, you know, generating that revenue by engaging with the user base. You know, most of a founder's time in the very beginning is spent talking to customers and working on the product. So Turo was attractive because we don't, you know, necessarily have to spend all of that time up front. The platform sends us the customers, and then we just have to have great customer service and have a great product. So those are the things that we focus on. And so, yeah, so we tested it out with our first car, and it took off immediately. And so then once we had proof of the efficacy of the decision, we just, you know, we doubled down on what was working.
And so I know you said 5 cars almost immediately. So why is such a, I guess, aggressive approach such early on? Why go like all in and not just say, all right, let's try 1 or 2?
Yeah, so we already had 2 cars that were our personal cars, and then we bought a third car. And when the third car started doing so well within the first, you know, month, we said, okay, there's no reason not to list our other 2 cars. And then when those two cars also, were doing well, we said, all right, Super Bowl's coming up in February. Super Bowl's in LA. Our whole brand is Cali convertibles. All of our cars are convertibles. So we saw an opportunity to do really well there. And the downside to scaling, basically it all comes down to the downside to scaling didn't outweigh the upside, because we had already built a robust system for identifying the right types of cars that were likely to generate good revenue for us and not be so expensive that if something happened and Turo stiffed us, that we would be out of luck. So we had confidence in our procedures and our protocols. So the only question was, could we handle that kind of a workload? And that was a leap of faith that we took, that 5 was going to be the magic number of cars we could handle on our own. And we, it's been good. It's been tough, but it's been fine. So additional cars are coming, but we're probably going to have to hire people.
Okay. And I was going to ask too, so just remind everyone again, your location, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm right in downtown LA.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I started out Valley,
but now I'm going to say, I'm not going to lie. Do you think that kind of plays a factor in the overall success of it? And the only reason why I asked that, right, is because let's say someone is living in a smaller city, or I mean, you mentioned Super Bowl time. That's like you said, that's peak car rental time. So like for someone, like, do you think that you would have started this business had you been living in a smaller city?
Probably not. I mean, I don't think the numbers, I mean, it's possible, but I don't think the variables would have lined up. Those variables that I was talking about, the market is probably the biggest one. And I didn't mention it, but the market is probably the biggest one. I was, talking to my co-founder, AKA my girl, the other day, and I was explaining to her that, I don't want to make investments where it's a close call. If when I run the numbers and I do my research, if it looks like, it could make money or it could break even or lose money, like that's not an investment I want to make. I want to make an investment where all the cards are stacked in my favor. So 1, LA is the number 1 market for Turo. 2, Turo itself is a growing platform. So not only is it already saturated enough to support the hosts, it's growing and it's still young. 3, we identified the most popular car, the most popular features, and the most popular location, even within LA in general. And we check all those boxes with our brand. So if someone's in a smaller market, I mean, depends on the market. So LA's number 1. If we're talking about the, 2, 3, 4, maybe top 5 markets, it's probably fine. You know what I mean? If it's New York or DC or Vegas or something like that, it's probably fine. If it's a much smaller market, I'd be very wary. I'd want to see what the numbers look like and be very sure that the volume that I can expect will support the business decision. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people like to make emotional decisions about getting into any business or making, investments, but the numbers will tell you everything you need to know, or almost everything.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And it sounds like obviously, you're a big numbers guy, even dating back to the Rolly. But with this Turo business, how have you and your co-founder kind of been able to work well together with a business like this?
Yeah, so it's been amazing. She's the co-founder, but she's also the COO, and I'm the CEO. And a lot of people throw around those terms, but just to run through what the typical job of those officers is. The CEO is typically in charge of the vision of the company, raising the money, and the management of the officers, underneath the board, of course. The COO is charged with literally running the company, to operate the company, the chief operating officer. So the day-to-day obligations, the things that need to happen in order for the business to run, those are the responsibilities of the COO. So she organizes the calendar, makes sure that there's always an awareness of when there are pickups and drop-offs. She's constantly thinking of ways to make our process more efficient. So, for example, one of the issues that we ran into early on is that we could get a request for a car for an hour out. And if the car just came back, or if we had been driving it and it's dirty, we would need to go wash it and then get it to the customer. And that may be fine if we're not doing anything else, or if that's the only one. But if that happens with two cars at the same time, or if one of us is dropping one car off and the other one's dropping another car off, and that happens, then we have a problem. So solutions, so for example, our solution is, as soon as a car comes back, we get it cleaned up, and then we bought car covers to cover the car so that it's basically like a product sitting in the wrapper. And if the next trip is not, the next day and already booked, then we cover the car up and we leave it there. And then when the next trip does come, we're ready to go. But she runs all of that. You know what I mean? I help her. And since early on, I do, help her with the pickups and drop offs. And especially if it's like somewhere far off or if it's late at night or something like that. But she's in charge of it is the point. And my job is scaling, like I said, the CEO's job is managing the officers, scaling the business, and being in charge of the vision. So, it was my job to get us to a point of 5 cars. And then I have, other partners in line to partner up with us when we're ready to scale. And if this were a startup, it'd be my job to get the investors in the door, et cetera. So, yeah.
And so talk to me too a little bit about like the overall maintenance of it, right? Like just the overall, I guess, pre and post flicks that you might have to take.
Yeah, we had to, and that's the thing that is intuitive. It seems like common sense, but one important thing about maintaining a high quality business is developing protocols for everything, even the things that you think are mundane. So that's one of those things where before and after every trip, we have to take photos of the car so that we can keep track and be organized as it pertains to any new damage that comes in. And one of our first, our first car, one of the first weeks, it actually got stolen. And the dude, he rented it out. It was last minute booking. And then when he was supposed to come back, he just didn't show up. And we had been renting out for like a couple weeks, something like that. And it ended up being this whole ordeal where Turo got a private investigator, and we eventually found the car. And it wasn't too damaged. But one thing we did well was we had our protocol for the pictures that we take of the car every single time. And it does a couple things. One, it gives you obviously the ability to track the damage, but having a protocol gives you the ability to be efficient when you're doing it and to iterate, to build on the quality of it. Because if you're just winging it every time, you can't really make that process better. But if you go, all right, this is what we're doing every single time, but then the next time you do it, you notice one little thing that could be improved. Then you just take the existing model and you tweak it a little bit, and you just keep doing that over time. But you can't really do that if you don't have protocols in the first place. And then the other thing is, if you don't have protocols, it leads to expending a lot of energy that could be going elsewhere, opportunity costs. And that makes it really difficult to scale a business, let alone run a business long term, because you just get exhausted and it falls apart. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think, good thing that you kind of mentioned, just the overall preparation is key, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is knowing all those things ahead of time. But do you have any, I guess, words of advice, or I guess what's 3 things that you would tell a newbie that's trying to get started with Turo?
Yeah, I would say 1, be very meticulous about your criteria for the car you're going to get. Make sure you're in a good market, but also make sure your product is something that people want. And all of these resources are online. You can just go online, figure out what the most popular car in your market is, and figure out where your market ranks for Turo in general. So I'll say that's 1. That's do your pre-research, because that will support you and save you if something does go wrong. 2, this is actually still part of 1. Part of that criteria should be the amount of car you can afford. Because if you jump out the window and get something that costs too much, and then something happens, and for some reason Turo doesn't cover it, you've put yourself in a position where you've taken on unnecessary risk when you can get started for much less. 2, I would say it's good to have a partner and understand balance when it comes to choosing a partner. And this is for starting any business. Don't pick someone who is just like you, and you're going to either compete with each other all the time or clash all the time. and don't pick someone who doesn't bring any value to the table. The best companies are run by partnerships where the team, they balance each other. So one partner has things that the other partner doesn't, and they fill each other's weaknesses and they support each other's strengths. So that would be the second thing. Pick a good partner. And then the third thing I would say is just get started. Like, don't be afraid and just like overthink it and feel like you need to watch and pay for a ton of courses. And it's a really straightforward business. There isn't like some magic secret sauce. If you're reasonably intelligent and hardworking and you care about quality and customer service, you'll do well. Just get in, pace yourself, and yeah, it'll be fine.
Do you feel like everyone should consider starting a business with their partner, their literal actual partner?
With their partner, I mean,
obviously it's worked out for you.
Yeah, I think you should consider it, and I think it could be good for relationships, but I don't think everyone can handle it because it requires elite level communication. It requires a deep understanding of each partner's role and a comfort with those roles, and each partner being responsible within those roles. And it requires the ability to be partners in the business while still prioritizing your partnership outside of the business. And that's a lot. Those are a lot of things to juggle. And if you can't handle that, then you should probably just be, regular partners and not business partners, so to speak. It's hard enough trying to be regular partners and, be responsible and do everything the right way.
Yeah.
Adding another partnership on that with different rules is, not for everybody.
And that's okay too, right? Like I know, like a lot of people kind of debate that or go back and forth, but that's okay too. It's understanding that your relationship isn't like everyone else's.
Right.
But I will say, man, you got one hell of a story. When we talk even about the beginning, starting from Hartford, Connecticut, of course, hearing your story, obviously, dealing with public speaking and speaking in so many different countries, and even starting off with local assemblies, the idea of now being a corporate attorney, and even retiring at some point. And even we talked about breaking free from bad spending habits and even diving deeper into that, right? There might be even a layer underneath that people have to address, and appreciate you for being transparent and personal about that, to even talking about Rolex, right? The idea of like that, in my opinion, is a form of asset class, and just the idea of like that actually is an investment, and that it's okay to buy dope things, right? It is okay to buy dope things, but it's having a plan and purpose behind them. Everyone's personal situation is different, and obviously now too, right? Having a Turo business with your co-founder, and not putting yourself in a box, right? Like not limiting yourself to just one thing, being a person and a Black man that's capable of doing a variety of things. And the reason why I list out all those things, because it ties into my final question for you. And that question is a question that I ask everyone that's been on Define Your Legacy. And that question is, how do you want to be remembered?
Man, that's a tough one for me. And I've been asked that question before. And I feel like that's one of those ones that changes as you grow. And, it'd be a lie to say that I don't care about being remembered. I don't necessarily believe any of us will be in the long run, but I want to be. And I think we all want to be, and that's okay. And I think the way I want to be remembered is as someone who was thoughtful, as someone who had pure intentions, and as someone who added at least one valuable thing to the world. At least one.
What do you think that one is?
I'm still figuring it out, man. Print it out.
That's real. I mean, just being transparent and just honest and just,
Yeah.
But I like to ask, that question to put everything, in perspective, right? Just to give people a chance to remind themselves even too that, like, I mean, you mentioned it too early on, life is short, life can
Hmm.
really change quickly. And so it is what it is, but you just got to roll with the punches. But if you could, man, one, thank you obviously for being on the show. But if
Yeah.
you could, if you don't mind, just drop your social, right? Like where people can find you, drop the website if you like, whatever you like. Run wild with the promo.
Yeah, man. I go by Khiree ESQ on IG is where I'm probably most active. It's Khiree_ESQ. I think it's the same on TikTok. I'm on there sometimes. And then Facebook is just my name, Khiree Smith. LinkedIn is my name, Khiree Smith. And you'll see me there.
For sure. And again, man, thank you again for being on the show. But do you have any final words for the people of Defiant Legacy? Anything you want to leave them with?
Yeah, man. The process is the goal. That's my life mantra. And it's a double/triple entendre. It means, one, the process is what you should be focused on. And it also means, two, the process and the goal are indistinguishable. The monks say the journey is the destination, and it means the same thing. Whenever I'm in a position where I'm feeling anxious or I'm losing perspective or I'm losing focus, I meditate on that idea that the process itself is the goal and anything that I want to accomplish. If I am truly living in the process, then one, time becomes infinite, because the more you can be in that moment, the smaller the increment of time that you can live within, then you can just stretch time to infinity. But also, it allows you to be in a win-win scenario no matter what. Because no matter what you're talking about, even if you're talking about the gym, if you're focused on the process and that is your goal, then you necessarily will arrive at that goal that maybe you're thinking of as on the other side of the horizon or something like that. And the same goes for legacy. If you are thoughtful and conscientious about the way you're living your life, and you are, appreciative of those moments and living them meaningfully, then you will necessarily arrive at the place where you've defined your legacy the way that you want to define it.
Wow, that was poetic, especially the last part. You tying that in. That was bravo. That was poetic. But yeah, man, thank you again. Of course, for being on the show. Like I said in the beginning of this episode, we were gonna have a dope conversation. I think it's safe to say, that we definitely did. But on the Defiant Legacy front, y'all make sure you follow Defiant Legacy on Instagram at Defiant Legacy _ at the end. DYL Podcast on Twitter. Defiant Legacy on Facebook. Subscribe to Theus Elijah on YouTube, as well as Theus Elijah on TikTok. Leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, as well as Spotify. Check out the link in the description of this episode for the online store. And last but not least, all right, just a reminder, episodes drop 8:24 a.m. Eastern every Thursday morning. All right, 8:24 a.m. Eastern. And just like that, Khiree, we appreciate you again for being on the show. And just like that, y'all, we gone. Peace.